So yesterday, Ukrainian-aligned groups invaded Russia. That's where we are at the 2-year point in this war. Now, this is very much still an ongoing operation as I'm recording this the morning of March 13th, 2024. So we're going to talk about what we know, which is where this took place, the groups involved, as well as a little background on each, one of whom is pretty shady, all things considered, and then the response from Russia and Ukraine, which, in what should be a shock to nobody, very different accounts of how those two sides are seeing this action along the border region between the two countries. So starting with where it took place, it looks like the bulk of the operation is playing out in and around an area called Tetkino, which is a part of the Kursk Oblast in western Russia along their border with Ukraine. There were some reports yesterday throughout the day of increased fighting, attacks taking place at various Russian checkpoints along their border with Ukraine. But as the day went on, it looks like the bulk of the operation, from what we can see right now, is playing out in and around Tetkino. Now, when looking at the groups involved, we have the Russian Volunteer Corps and the Freedom of Russia Legion. We've talked about both of these before on this channel. There might have been some other stragglers involved here, but these are the two primary actors. Now, both of these groups have a couple things in common. One, they're made up primarily of Russians that come to these groups through a variety of means, but they are primarily Russian organizations fighting on the side of Ukraine, technically. However, it's very much an enemy of my enemy is my friend type situation. And then both of these organizations are very nationalist in their view and what they're trying to accomplish in Russia, not necessarily in Ukraine. There are some pretty significant differences between each of these as well. And both of these organizations are pretty public, all things considered. They've got websites, Telegram channels, Twitter accounts, or at least one of them has a Twitter account. I'll link all those in the description below if you want to go down your own rabbit hole reading more about these organizations. But starting with the Russian Volunteer Corps. This is a military political organization of Russian volunteers. This is coming from their statement. So this is how the RVC describes themselves. They say they are primarily citizens of the Russian Federation residing in Ukraine who've been involved in the conflict on the side of Ukraine since 2014 and have stood up for its defense since February 24, 2022. In 2014, the handful of guys that are now part of the Russian Volunteer Corps, they were fighting with Azov. That was their initial connection into Ukraine. The connection there was the far-right aspect of Azov. That is how this Russian Volunteer Corps came to be. They are aligned with a lot of right-wing extremist organizations throughout Europe. A lot of their members, including their leader, Denis Nikitin, have been banned from a handful of countries across Europe due to their ideology. And their initial connection in Ukraine was with some of the far-right extremism in the Azov regiment back in 2014. When the full-scale invasion kicked off in 2022, they spun off, created their own group, Russian Volunteer Corps. They say the fighters of the Russian Volunteer Corps share conservative views and traditional beliefs. They say their main goals are to restore Ukraine's territorial integrity within its borders, as in 1991, to overthrow the current dictatorship of the Russian Federation. Now, again, going back to those, if you read those at a high level, doesn't sound anything too crazy. Conservative views, traditional beliefs can be interpreted a lot of different ways, right? Well, in this case, their leader, Denis Nikitin, again, historic ties, he's Russian, historic ties with neo-Nazi groups and far-right extremist organizations all throughout Europe. And largely the statements coming out of the RVC is that they want more of an ethno-state in Russia. So one of their arguments for why they're fighting against Russia alongside Ukraine is they say that they want to overthrow the government of Putin, and they assert that Russia's government should abandon its imperial ambitions and instead focus on the well-being of ethnic Russians. And that's kind of the core message for the RVC, is stop fighting in Ukraine. You guys don't need to be fighting against Ukraine or trying to fight against, countries in NATO further west. You need to focus on ethnic Russians. That's the message for the RVC. Then you have the Freedom of Russia Legion. This is a little bit different organization. Again, very nationalist in their view. In fact, one of the founders came from the Russian imperial movement. To kind of give you an idea of the ideology here, again, pulling from their statements about what they say of their organization, the Freedom of Russia Legion was founded in spring of 2022. They say the reason for its creation was the desire of the Russians themselves, together with the Ukrainian people, to fight against Putin's armed gang. They say there are 3 groups of volunteers in the Legion right now. They have citizens of the Russian Federation who were legally in Ukraine for family or work reasons when this war kicked off. So people stuck in Ukraine and rather than trying to get back to Russia, decided to take up arms and fight with the Freedom of Russia Legion. They say they have Russians who independently arrived in Ukraine from Russia and Europe to fight against the Putin regime. So foreign fighters, in a sense, coming from other countries flowing into Ukraine to fight against Russia. And then former career military personnel of the Russian Federation, who initially understood the criminality of Putin's war and deliberately refused to satisfy the imperial lust of the bald bunker grandfather. Haven't heard that term thrown around a lot, maybe a new nickname for Putin. This is a significant component of the Freedom of Russia Legion. Early in the war, there was discussions that platoons, maybe even small company-sized elements, were defecting to Ukraine. Some of those elements made that rather than just going to a POW camp, they wanted to fight. A lot of them were integrated into the Freedom of Russia Legion. Russians fighting for a different Russia, if you will. And the way that they're able to do that right now is by strapping on a yellow or a blue armband, being in Ukraine, and fighting back against Putin's forces. The Freedom of Russia Legion, in terms of what their goals are here, they say, first and foremost, Putin will lose power, will be convicted and punished along with the traitors to our state. Citizens will have their rights restored and guaranteed. Second, a new generation of Russians will come to power, a new generation who respects their people and their interests. Third, Russia is leaving Ukraine completely and irrevocably. We will restore peaceful relations with Ukraine as a sovereign state. Fourth, as a guarantee of peace, we approve the demilitarization of the Bryansk, Kursk, Belgorod, Voronezh, and Rostov regions. Probably butchered that second to last one there. And they say Russia will pay for the restoration of Ukraine. By doing this, we will return the trust of the civilized world to the country. And then lastly, the lifting of sanctions while implementing our plan is not a question. It is a fact, but it will be difficult for us to achieve. So that's where the Russian Freedom of Russia Legion is headed, right? Their big plan is to replace Putin, replace his government. They think overall this government is leading Russia down the wrong path. And the only way to change the Russian course is to eliminate Putin, remove him from power, as well as all of his cronies. So the Freedom of Russia Legion, we've got a bunch of videos and pictures that I've been sharing showing their work in Russia yesterday. And this isn't their first raid into Russian territory. They actually put out a statement last night that said, after a full day of combat operations in Russian territory, where they said, the day has come to an end. Putin's troops should get ready for the night. We urge our fellow citizens living in the border zone not to lose their vigilance and, if possible, not leave their shelters. We wish you a good night. Take care of yourself. And we are already holding our positions and moving forward. Tomorrow will be a new day. There will be a new Russia. I should note that the Freedom of Russia Legion actually put out on their Telegram channel a way for Russian citizens to contact them if they had sensitive military information, the location of Russian troop movements, military fortifications in the region. It'd be interesting at some point, we're never going to get this, but it'd be interesting to find out how many people inside of Russia in these border regions actually sent information to the Freedom of Russia Legion to help with their targeting as this operation played out. Maybe it's zero. Maybe it's not. Anyways, it'd be interesting to see what that actually looked like. And then Denis Nikitin, the leader of the Russian Volunteer Corps, put out a video message as well, saying, we appeal to our fellow citizens, residents of the city of Belgorod, officials of the Belgorod administration, and those who hear us. Putin's killers are carrying out massive attacks on peaceful Ukrainian cities, placing their positions between your homes, your children's schools, and government institutions. Every day, dozens of ordinary innocent people, mostly women and children, die from shelling from Belgorod. The shelling of Ukraine from the territory of Belgorod must stop. In this regard, we are forced to open fire on military locations located in the cities of Belgorod and Kursk. To avoid civilian casualties, we urge everyone to leave the city immediately. We call on local authorities to save human lives and begin evacuating the cities of Kursk and Belgorod regions. So in turning to what the two sides are saying here, again, by and large, the Russian Volunteer Corps and the Freedom of Russia Legion have released a lot of videos and pictures saying that they are actively involved in fighting in Russia, that they are still there. We've seen some pictures already today coming out. Now, to be fair, these could have been pictures taken another time. The groups are saying that they were taken today, showing that they are still inside of Russian territory and still fighting, still holding ground. That is very different from what the Russian Ministry of Defense is saying. Yesterday, the Russian MOD said, quote, this morning, units of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, together with units of the border service of the FSB, thwarted an attempt by the Kyiv regime to make a breakthrough in the border territory of the Russian Federation in the Belgorod and Kursk regions. They say the terrorist formations were driven back after suffering significant losses. No violations of the state border had been committed. Additionally, they said that Ukraine lost 234 militants killed, 7 tanks, 3 Bradley fighting vehicles during an attempt to break through the state border. Now, Russia has shared some pictures and images, or some pictures and videos showing some of the fighting that took place. I don't know that I've seen anything near 234 militants killed at this point. They've also released some videos of their soldiers on the ground talking about having taken part in this fighting. Again, very different. It's hard to tell from the outside looking in. Russia says this didn't take place at all. Anybody who even tried to cross the border was immediately killed, including a bunch of Bradleys, which I haven't seen the pictures or videos for that quite yet. But then you've got the Russian Volunteer Corps and the Freedom of Russia Legion saying, actually, we're still inside of Russia. We are still fighting. Day 2 is about to begin. And then a pro-Russian mill blogger wrote that enemy resources are distributing a video of allegedly entering Russian villages. As colleagues have already written, and absolutely correctly, all of these recordings are fake and pre-made blanks. So there's a couple key aspects to pick up on here from the Russian version of events. One, it's fake. It's not real. And to the extent that it is real, these are all Ukrainian armed forces trying to invade Russia. What I've not seen from any major Russian channels is the recognition that these groups are made up almost entirely of Russian citizens. The Russian Volunteer Corps and the Freedom of Russia Legion are almost exclusively Russians, some of whom fought with Russia in the opening stages of the war. Instead of referring to these men as Russians or kind of getting the details of the groups that are carrying out these attacks, they're calling them terrorists, and they're calling them Ukrainian armed forces. Just an idea of kind of how this information is being portrayed. Now, in wrapping up, again, it's not entirely clear what has played out here. The fog of war is very, very thick around this situation, as it was the last few times that the RVC and the FRL moved into Russian territory. It's going to take days, maybe even weeks, to have a full understanding of what actually took place here. I will say the Russian take that this is a PR stunt, to a degree, is correct. Right? These groups are nowhere near the size that would be necessary to take significant territory in Russia, hold that territory for a long period of time, or even push forward, right? They're not equipped to do that. They don't have the capacity, the manpower, and the equipment to carry out something of that scope. So to a degree, it is a PR stunt. This is an aspect of trying to show that Putin is weak, that he cannot control his own territory, that while Russia is waging a war all across Ukraine, that the Russian citizens in other parts of the country are not safe from foreign military incursion, if you will. So there's very much a PR aspect to this. This is not, I don't think anybody should look at this and think that the RVC or FRL has the intention or the capability to continue pushing forward. In their best of hopes, I would say they're hoping that some Russian elements see this and decide maybe that's a good message, and they lay down their arms and they join their ranks. I think that's kind of a moonshot. It's entirely possible that some will do that, but enough to cause a, kind of slow but steady collapse of the Russian state doesn't look like that's realistic right now. So again, PR stunt, yes, it is a way to show that Putin is not as strong as he suggests, a way to show that the borders are not as secure as he would like his people to believe. That, by and large, is likely what the goal of this operation is. But that's all I've got for now. Of course, if interested in this or other national security subjects, be sure to check out our Substack, linked in the description below. We're putting out 3 to 4 articles a week talking about a variety of national security subjects that I think are adjacent to what I'm talking about in the videos. Things like 3D printed weapons in Myanmar, Ukraine hunting Russian mercenaries in Africa, China's little blue men out in the South Pacific. Just interesting subjects that aren't necessarily getting a lot of coverage elsewhere. They're all linked in the description below. Hope you find them valuable. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.